Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to my home. What do you think? It's a pretty nice tree, huh? We are in the season. I have a great story for you today. Excited to share it with you. The Honey Makers by Gail Gibbons. It is springtime. Two beekeepers have placed a beehive on a hill. Activity begins around the hive. The honeybees and the beekeepers are Honeybees travel to and from the hive. Their earliest ancestors lived about 80 million years ago. The scientific name for honeybee comes from Latin Apis mellifera, meaning honey bearer. Honeybees are social creatures. They form highly structured groups called colonies. In a colony, as many as 50,000 or more bees live together and work at their own special job. That's the wooden beehive, wild honeybee hive. Many honeybees like to make their home in dark, enclosed places. Often a colony of wild honeybees builds its hive in a hollow tree. Honeybees cared for by today's beekeepers live in a box-shaped wooden hives. Inside the beehive, the honeybees are building an amazing structure called a honeycomb. It is made up of countless six-sided cells. Stored in many of these wax cells is the food that bees and people love to eat. Honey. Six-sided shape. Do you know what that's called? Hexagon. Yeah, nice. Honeycomb. Worker bee, drone bee, queen bee. They look different, don't they? 3 different kinds of honeybees live inside all beehives. There is one queen, about 100 male drones, and thousands of female worker bees. Like all insects, bees have 3 body parts. There is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Honeybees have other parts too. The long hollow tongue, the proboscis, sucks up sweet juices called nectar from flowers to make honey. The 2 antennae or feelers are used for touch and smell. The simple eyes are believed to be sensitive to light. The thorax, the head. 2 big compound eyes are made up of many eye lenses joined together. Small wing or hind wing. Abdomen. Large wing or forewing. The stinger is used for protection. Only the females have stingers. I did not know that. There we go. The queen bee. She's normally bigger than the other ones. There's the drone bee. The queen is the largest of the honeybees, and she can live the longest, from 3 to 5 years. All the other bees in the colony live for about 2 months, except over winter, when they have a few months longer. It is the queen's job to make sure the hive never runs out of bees. To do this, she leaves the hive to mate with her drones. Then she lays as many as 2,000 eggs a day. Drones are usually smaller than the queen. Their only job is to mate with her. Worker bee, worker brood cell. Many cells in the beehive are used for storing honey, but some are used for the queen to lay her eggs. They are called brood cells. In each brood cell, a bee will develop and grow. The largest brood cells are queen brood cells, also called royal cells. Drone brood cells are smaller. Even smaller are the worker brood cells. The eggs in those cells will become worker bees. Although all worker bees are female, they do not lay eggs. Instead, they do the work for the beehive. Larva. Worker bee called the nurse bee. Bee milk is a milky syrup that is full of nutrition and is made by glands inside the nurse worker bee. Bee bread is a combination of pollen and honey. Huh. Royal jelly is made the same way as bee milk, but is more nutritious. Queen larva. Most eggs the queen lays are no bigger than the period at the end of the sentence. After 3 days, a larva hatches from each one. For the last 3 days, worker bees called nurse bees feed the larva bee milk. Then they feed it bee bread. A queen larva is fed royal jelly through its growth. Cocoon. Each larva grows quickly, then spins a silky cocoon around itself. Inside the cocoon, a pupa develops. A nurse bee seals the cell with wax. Metamorphosis. Adult honeybee. Little by little, the pupa changes. It begins to look more like an adult insect. The process is called metamorphosis. Queens develop in about 16 days from the time the eggs are laid. The metamorphosis of drones and workers takes about 21 to 24 days. Finally, after transformation is complete, an adult bee chews its way out of the brood cell. An adult honeybee. Okay. Nurse bee. The honeybee is a worker bee. From the minute she comes out of her brood cell, she is as busy as a bee. For the next 3 weeks, she will have a number of different jobs to do inside the hive. First, she's a house bee, cleaning and polishing the cells. About 3 days later, she becomes a nurse bee. Wax making bee. Court. After 10 days of being a nurse bee, she becomes a wax making bee. She makes flakes of wax in her abdomen and chews them to mold her new cells or repair old ones. Wax making bees are also in charge of storing the nectar and pollen that other honeybees bring back to the hive. Other workers care for the queen. They are a court. They cluster around the queen to continually feed and groom her. They're really taking care of her. Group effort here. There's a stinger. There's a bear. Guard bee. About a week later, the wax-making bees become a guard bee and begin its outdoor life. Guard bees protect the hive. They chase away intruders with their stingers. They also alert the other bees by spreading a special scent when there is danger. A guard bee will sometimes die in battle to protect the hive and its honey. This dedication. The worker bee is now about 3 weeks old. She is ready to become a forager bee. Her last job, but a very important one. Forager bees are the bees you see zipping from flower to flower. They collect sweet juices called nectar from the flower for honey making. The forager bee. Crop or honey stomach. At each flower, the forager bee collects nectar with a proboscis. She stores the nectar in a special part of her body called the crop, or honey stomach. This stomach is separate from her other stomach. As she goes from flower to flower, she comes in contact with a yellow powder called pollen. Some of the pollen is collected in a little basket formed by the special hairs on her hind legs. As the forager bee collects nectar, she carries pollen from flower to flower. This is part of the process called pollination. When she has visited many flowers and her crop is full, she beelines back to her hive. Pollination is the movement of pollen from the stamen to the stigma of the same kind of plant. This makes seeds grow to new plants. Bees are really important in this process. The honey cell. Nectar can be up to 80% water when it's first brought to the hive. Honeybee, forager bee. Wax making bee. Back inside the hive, the forager bee brings up or regurgitates the nectar. Then she travels it by tongue to a hive bee. The nectar is passed by tongue among the other hive bees until its moisture is gone. Then a wax-making bee places the nectar in a honey cell. There it continues to dry. More and more nectar is added to the honey cells. House bees cluster over the cell and fan their wings to evaporate even more of the moisture in the nectar. As the nectar loses water, it becomes thicker and thicker. Finally, wax-making bees cap or seal the cell with wax. Slowly, the nectar ripens into honey. Honey is about about 18% water now. It's changing. Dances of the honeybee. The circle dance. The forager honeybee circles in one direction, turns around and circles back the other way. This dance tells the other forager bees to look for new flowers anywhere within 300 feet of their hive. Wow, communicating by movement? When forager bees return to their hive, they have a special way of telling the other forager bees of important discoveries, like a new location of flowers full of nectar and pollen. They do the dances of the bees. A forager honeybee can visit up to 10,000 flowers a day. All the nectar she collects in her entire life can make only about 1 teaspoon of honey. To make 1 pound of honey, it takes nectar from over 1 million flowers. Also, different kinds of honey come from different kinds of flowers. The Wagtail Dance. This dance tells the other forager honeybees that the flowers are further than 300 feet away. The direction she dances while wagging her tail tells where the flowers are in relation to the sun. The number of wags per 15 seconds tell how far away the flowers are. Dance moves. The wild hive, hollow log hive, clay pot hive. Skep. Hanging movable frame beehive. Honeybees have always been valued for the honey they make. For thousands of years, people have stolen honey from the wild beehive. People become beekeepers when they begin to make their own hives. Some use hollow logs, others use clay pots. Later, in about 1500 or 1500, European beekeepers started using upside-down basket hives called skeps. Then in about 1850, the hanging movable frame beehive was invented. The honey super is the section the beekeepers will harvest. The food chamber is where the bees store their honey and they need for their food. The brood chamber is where the queen lays her eggs. On top of the hill is a modern beehive. The beehive is stacked in sections. In each section hang about 10 wooden frames where the bees build their honeycombs. To help the bees build their honeycombs faster, the beekeeper places wax foundations in the frames. The foundation is a sheet of wax impressed on both sides with a pattern of honey-developed bee cells. This is fascinating. I love this. Helmet with veil. White coveralls with elastic or ties at the wrist and ankles. White makes bees feel calm. A metal hive tool is used for prying apart frames stuck together. A smoker calms the bees. It's time for the beekeepers to harvest the honey. The honeybees have had several months to build and fill the honeycombs. The colder the winter, the more food they will need. The beekeepers move slowly around the hive. They wear special clothes and use special equipment to protect themselves from getting stung. Back at home in a shed, the beekeepers use a hot knife to cut the wax caps off the honeycomb. Then the honeycomb frame is placed inside an extractor. It spins around at a high speed to remove the honey without breaking the honeycomb. The honey goes into a collecting tank. There's a collecting tank extractor. Wow. Amazing. I really like this. Next, the honey is filtered through a screen and a cloth to remove small pieces of wax. Then the honey is packed in airtight jars. Sometimes beekeepers melt down old and damaged honeycombs to make beeswax candles and other things. The rest of the empty honeycomb frames are returned to the hive for the honeybees to fill again. For some beekeepers, honey making is a hobby. They use the honey themselves or give it away as gifts. Commercial beekeepers provide stores and shops with gleaming jars of their product to sell. Delicious sweet honey from the honey makers. And that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed the honey makers. I'm going to look at my tree. Welcome to my home. Hope you enjoyed that too. And I will see you soon, boys and girls.